Um, what measures will you take to reduce the local carbon footprint and promote sustainability? And this time we'll go to Rebecca.
Okay, so the impacts of climate crisis are felt disproportionately by those who are made socially vulnerable by issues such as poverty. Fuel and food poverty are very much interlinked with climate justice and social justice. We all need to have enough to live in comfort, security, and safety. So, as actually Susan just mentioned about properly insulated buildings, can help to tackle sustainability and inequality by reducing energy bills, just by making the houses obviously better insulated. You're reducing the energy that's required to heat them. Making sure that our existing social homes are well maintained and adapted comes back to my answer before, actually, about how we need to make sure that our housing stock is well looked after. And I think few people better understand rural poverty and the way it's hidden than those in Ardnamurchan and South Lochaber. And we all know that there's a rural premium of facilities that are always more expensive and unaffordable and non-existent. That's in challenge to that, the misunderstandings around climate change and people feeling disconnected from the everyday, that is disconnected from the everyday life, and feel that if they are investing in these things, that they're somehow being exploited by big businesses. So I think it's really important that we make sure that we adequately fund and advertise the advice and financial support that enables people to improve their energy efficiency in their homes, especially grants for those in the lowest incomes, so that people don't feel priced out of living in safe, secure, climate sustainable homes.
That's great, thank you. We'll go to Nathan.
I think there's a good point there Rebecca makes. It's the fact that, the basic thing, you can't expect people who are struggling to heat a home or, struggling to get by to really care about the environment. And I think that is something we need to bear in mind, is that it's very easy for people who are quite secure and safe to jump on this moral high horse, when those who are actually genuinely struggling, it's not something that you're struggling enough in life as it is. So I think that's something that needs to be considered and remembered when we're dealing with this. To be honest with you, for sustainability, for local growth, I actually would probably go back to something Susan said just previously in the last question, which is, why aren't we doing more locally? Because at the end of the day, if you want to be a more sustainable environment, surely having your food come from 10 miles down the road instead of 200 miles down the road is surely better for the planet in general, Lorries aren't exactly eco-friendly. V12 diesel puts out quite a bit, so honestly, I think that, yeah, if we look at a more local solution in those sort of ways. The other thing I think is something we should be doing is we should be encouraging growth in new sectors, in new businesses. We should be making sure that, the education sector is encouraging our young people, so that the next generation of people are free thinkers, that we have new and exciting ways that are going to help solve this problem, because there's a lot of new alternatives. I think there's a lot of solutions we still haven't found, and we need to make sure that what we're doing to make sure that sustainability is going to continue and that better ways of coming forward. So like we've seen about before, electric cars, they're a stopgap. We don't, a lot of people aren't very happy with them. We need to be making sure the future generation is equipped to be able to innovate. And I think that's what our biggest thing is make sure the next generation are going to have a good chance. We're going to do, we need to provide them with the resources to make sure that they are going forward as dynamic individuals with dedication and passion. And that, I think, will help solve a lot of the problems. So number one, localize, bring it into a tighter sphere, stop. Again, like Susan was saying last time, surely having things built and grown and produced in a smaller area, if possible, is better for the environment, because it's just simply travel, when things are being shipped hundreds of miles, thousands of miles across the world, that's just not a sustainable thing. So.
Thank you, Nathan. We'll go to Susan.
This is something I'm kind of obsessed with, and a lot of scientists are obsessed with, and we've had a long time of people telling us that climate change is going to have very serious impacts, and I think we're now starting to see those impacts. And it's hard not to be rather pessimistic about it, in my view, because ever since we signed the Kyoto Protocol, I think in about 1995, something like that, and we held the first, we set up the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992. And ever since we started trying to do something about it, emissions have been rising, not going down. And we've made, I mean, in the UK, we've made excellent efforts, I think, with the Climate Change Act. We've got serious emission reductions. We've largely achieved it by closing coal-fired power stations and switching to gas. And now the government is trying to cut out emissions from gas, and people are kind of trying to put the brakes on a bit, you know, because people are not quite so keen on electrical heating. We need enormous changes, and I don't know whether as a species we're going to be able to get our heads around it and do that. I did a little study of carbon emissions in Lochaber when I was a few years ago, and that came up with some interesting data. The biggest single source of carbon emissions is transport, and that's largely due to private cars. Well, it's road transport. And then there's another big chunk that is housing, and you can do wonderful things with renewables. You can build beautiful, new, modern, beautifully insulated houses, but most people can't afford to do that. And so retrofitting is absolutely essential to get into grips with housing. I mean, as Rebecca says, on behalf of people living in poverty as well as for the environmental benefits. And we also need to be thinking about peatlands. We've got an enormous resource in Lochaber in terms of peat stored in the soil, but damaged peat is producing emissions rather than getting rid of them, and that's something we really need to pay attention to if we're going to get to grips with this. I think there's a huge amount of work to do, and I think there are some very good initiatives across Highland. There's been some lovely work on peatlands up in the Flow Country in the north, and we have huge.
To interrupt you, Susan, you've gone over your time there. Sorry.
Okay,
Andrew,
right, I'll stop this.
Andrew.
I was rather enjoying that from Susan, and particularly the peatland. I would start off by suggesting that Highland Council should look at themselves before lecturing everyone else, because it's disappointing to see that they haven't met any of their net zero programme targets that they set themselves, as reported in last week's Climate Change Committee. And then you have newspaper headlines of Highland Council vans blocking electric vehicle points, or if you go around Lochaber, you'll find a alarming number of council-owned ones that are broken for extensive periods of time, or that we've missed our targets for our own sustainability training amongst our own workforce. And quite often, Highland Council is very good at coming up with lots of plans, not just for sort of environmental and sustainability issues, but not necessarily a great deal of action. And just taking up the theme of locality, which both Susan and Nathan have touched on, I think actually, although we perhaps can't influence the bigger picture that Susan was on about, we can take responsibility and action at a local level. And we do well to learn from the residents on the Isle of Egg and encourage and provide seed funding and support for more investment in smaller scale hydro and community wind and solar projects across Lochaber. I know, having been a community trust chairman, how difficult and how complicated it is to try and even get to the planning stage of a community hydro scheme, and every obstacle is put in your way, whereas governments, one after another, have provided huge subsidies for the electricity companies that benefits their taxpayers. And that's why I'm particularly supporting Angus MacDonald's campaign for a greater and defined community benefit from the various renewable energy schemes around the Highlands. And I could see that funding could be used for these smaller scale energy projects. And of course, we could touch on things like a more reliable bus service, but thinking beyond the traditional timetables that Rebecca spoke about previously in the traditional routes. What about actually subsidising electric buses that go around Loch Leven, connecting the various villages and communities around there, because quite a lot of the movement is around the loch rather than necessarily into Fort William. And smaller scale projects, wouldn't it be fantastic if each of our villages had food digesters and our food waste was being composted and dealt with on our local doorstep rather than traveling miles to be dealt with instead? And the list could go on, and I'm sure all of my fellow candidates have many other projects like that that would be fantastic at a local level.